What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. Another still worth it video you guys already know, and I think this is the first iPad that I'm reviewing this year. I don't think I've reviewed any other ones, and actually this is the first time that I'm reviewing this specific iPad. As you guys know, I usually go and review a ton of devices that I already own, but I actually had to go out of my way to pick this one up, and I think this is a really cool device. I think, obviously the style of this device has aged very well, and this is the first time in a long time Apple actually changed up the design quite a bit. And it might seem a little weird here and there, but this was a pro device at its core, and it still holds up very well in 2020, and that specific device is the iPad Pro, the 10.5 inch model though, the 2017 one. And what I like most about this thing is that yes, it has a little bit of bezel on it, but it's really not that much, and I think for a device like this, especially for an iPad, the bezel means less and less. It's not as big of a deal versus phones. There's still a ton of tablets out there that have an older type of design. You look at basically all the other competitions, there's really not that many. I would consider the Surface Books and those things kind of like dual hybrids, and those things still have a little bit of bezel on them too. But the iPad Pro, it makes use of that bezel by having obviously the front camera, but also the home button, which I do like. And I even own the first iPad Pro, the 2016 model. I use that basically as an alarm clock, and that one has so much bezel on it. I really don't use iPads, but I do like the 10.5 inch iPad for sure. Now when this thing came out in 2017 in June, so this year it will be turning 3 years old, and we've only really gotten one more Pro model after this, which was the 2018 model, and that iPad definitely has aged very well. I might do an updated review this year about those ones too, but this iPad I really do like. And even looking at the front, you have a 10.5 inch IPS panel on it. That resolution of that display is 1668 by 2224. It's a very good panel. You have True Tone on it. It has a very great panel on its front for sure. And even just keeping it stock and even just looking at it, going through things, it's a very good looking panel. It's more or less the same as the iPad Air 3, which is the same model as this, at least the same body, but just kind of updated. But here's the best thing about this panel, and the best thing about this iPad in my opinion, is that 120Hz refresh rate on that IPS panel. And that's one of my favorite things about this iPad. You can go, the first time I used it, I've used it before at Best Buy and things like that. If I went to the Apple store when this thing was still being sold, I would go through and it would be cool. But then when I actually used it myself for the first time, here when I bought it, I was astounded. I was like, dude, I've been missing out on this for so long. I had that 90Hz refresh rate on that OnePlus 7 Pro, and I was like, bro, this is cool, but this is awesome, and it really makes me want to use it even more, and it really does enhance the experience. I'm not even just saying that. It really does add a little bit of value on it, which is so cool. And it makes me want to use that over using an iMac or something, just because of that, fluidity in the display. So even though it's a little bit less practical than let's say a MacBook, it just gives that effect that it's so much cooler, and that's one thing that it has going for it without a doubt. On the bottom we have a lightning port, we have a headphone jack on this iPad as well. On the back, a single camera setup, and overall this body is more the same, but the bezels on it are a little bit slimmed down and it just looks a little bit better. I have the white model. I kind of wish I bought the black model, but this one was the cheapest at the time. And even talking about prices for a second, this thing when it came out, it cost however much it costed. Now they're still selling for quite a bit of money, $300, a little bit more than that, and that's actually pretty decent, in terms of how much value this thing has retained. Obviously that's not good for someone buying it. I want to get it for as cheap as possible, but this thing in terms of the value has actually held up quite a bit. So this thing on the outside definitely, I think it still holds up. I know the newer iPad Pros have very slimmed down bezels, but this thing, it makes use of those bezels, and I don't think it's a big deal at all. And I really do like the design of this thing, especially when I'm looking at something like an iMac with this amount of bezel on it. Even my MacBook Pros, this thing definitely doesn't look that bad. So that kind of covers it up in terms of the outside. Let's go and talk about the software. So this thing was released with iOS 10.3.2. We are right now on iPadOS 13. I think 13.3 is the newest one, unless the newer one comes out by the time you're watching this. And here's the thing, okay, this thing, because it didn't get released exactly with iOS 10, I'm going to assume that it's going to get the same updates as the iPhone 10 and the iPhone 8, because this thing doesn't have the A10 chip, it has the A10X chip. And if you remember, the last time we saw this was with the iPad Air 2. That one has the A8X chip, which is technically better than the iPhone 6's. So the iPad Air 2 ended up getting iPadOS 13, basically iOS 13, but the iPhone 6 didn't. So I'm pretty sure this iPad is going to follow the same exact route. It's going to be getting the same updates as the next iPhone after it, so it's going to be getting the same ones as the iPhone 10, which it should be. This is a very good tablet still, has a lot going for it. So in terms of software updates, you're going to be set. What's really interesting is as far as I know, the jailbreak, the check rain jailbreak that came out is actually compatible for this specific iPad as well. It's one of the few iPads that are compatible, and this one is, so that's really interesting. You have all those cool jailbreakable tweaks that you can get on an iPhone and everything on an iPad on a much bigger display, and that can really transform your iPad from being just like a 3 out of 10 device to being like a 8 out of 10 device just based off those features. There's things that a jailbroken iPhone can do that the newest ones can't, and there's things that a jailbroken iPad can do that the newest ones can't do either. So I think that's a really cool balance you have on this thing. Yes, it's a little bit older, but you do have some really cool features as well as the option of having that jailbreak. So in 2020, this thing has definitely been holding up quite well in my opinion. Now moving on to the performance side of things, this thing has the Apple A10X Fusion chip like I said, and there were a couple different models of this thing. So there's two different models of 64, which I probably wouldn't tell you to get, the 256 and the 512 gigabyte models. All those models had 4 gigabytes of RAM, which is really good. This was one of the first times that we saw 4 gigabytes of RAM on an iPad, and at this time the highest end iPhone only had 3 gigabytes of RAM. We didn't even get 4 gigabytes of RAM on an iPhone until the iPhone XS. So this thing definitely in terms of performance has held up very well. It's literally right on par with my like iPhone XS kind of. The scores are a little bit lower for sure, the benchmark scores, but in real world use, this thing flies through everything. And even kind of keeping that screen at that 30 Hz refresh or 60 Hz, whatever it is, keeping it there, it's still extremely smooth. When I open things, when I close things, whenever I'm going through an app, it's extremely smooth. I have really no complaints at all. I wish I did so that I can complain about it and make this video longer, but there's really nothing to complain about. It's a very smooth device, and even cranking that thing up to the 120 Hz refresh rate, I don't think it makes anything faster, but it just makes everything look faster, if that makes any sense. So if you click on something, it opens kind of like 60 frames per second, and when you're watching a video in 60 frames, it makes the illusion that it's a faster video in a way, or a smoother video, and that's more or less the same for the iPad, except multiply that by 2 because it's 120 Hz. This thing without a doubt in terms of performance is really good, and just having that 120 Hz refresh rate just makes things look so much better when you're playing a game. Most games are not compatible with it, but if you're going through and just browsing through the web browser or something like that, it really does enhance the experience. So that's a really cool thing I wanted to note. So in terms of performance in 2020, even going into late 2020, whatever, this thing is definitely holding up. It's not going to be slow anytime soon, so I wouldn't even worry about that if I were you. If you were worried about something else, if you're worrying about something about this iPad, it's definitely not going to be the performance without a doubt. So that pretty much covers it there in terms of performance. Now I'll hit on the camera for like 10 seconds. This thing has a 12 megapixel camera on the back and a 7 megapixel camera up front. Now with that back camera, you can do 4K videos, which is really cool, 1080p at up to 60 frames, and even 1080p at up to 120, which is really cool. It's pretty much the same camera as the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, actually more so the 7. This thing does not have a dual camera setup, so there's no portrait mode, there's no night mode or anything like that. However, it's still a very good camera for the time being. I don't really think most people are going to be using their iPads for dedicated cameras, but if you needed to, this is actually not that bad of a camera. So this is probably the first time, like I said, I own the original iPad Pro, the 13-inch one, the 9.7-inch one. That one wasn't that bad. It didn't have a bad camera. I think it was the same one as the 6S or something, but this one is actually pretty good. Like if you needed to film it, if you needed to go places with it, whatever, it's not a bad camera, and the front camera is pretty good too. So like I said, pretty much the same thing as the iPhone 7. So would you use the iPhone 7's camera, yes or no? That's pretty much how this camera is, more or less the same. So that pretty much covers it up in terms of the camera quality as well. Now ending it off with the battery life, this thing has a pretty big 8,134 milliamp hour battery, and that's actually a really big battery for this specific iPad. It's on iOS, so there's not a lot of background processes. It's it's not slow for sure, but the chipset, the A10, is a pretty decent chipset, the A10X at that. So it's a pretty good size battery for a pretty good performing tablet. So you mix those two things together and you have a pretty good battery life on a device like this for sure. What I will tell you though is that if you kind of ramp up that screen to that 120 Hz refresh rate, you will definitely see noticeable decrease in battery life overall. The battery health is not going to matter, all that stuff stays the same, and if you're charging the whole entire time, it's not a big deal. But if you're planning on taking this thing traveling and you're away from a charger all the time, if you do keep that screen at that 120 Hz refresh rate, like I said, the battery will kind of die faster than if you were to keep it at that stock 60 Hz. So it's not a big deal, take it as you will, but that is one thing you have to kind of keep in mind when you're using something like this. Yes, it's a really cool feature and I'm glad they put it in here, but it does suck up a little bit of battery life over the time and the duration of using it. So I can't give you an exact percentage. I'm sure if you research it you might see something, but that is a humongous thing to note. So battery life on this thing at that 60 Hz is great. Battery life on the 120 Hz is a little bit less than that. It's going to be about, I would say, you're probably going to see like a 40% decrease in battery, maybe 30% a little bit. So that kind of covers it there. And some other things I wanted to note, man. I mean, the build still feels like a very good iPad. Of course, the newer ones feel better, but this one doesn't feel that bad. You have 4 speakers on this thing, which is really, really cool. I love seeing that. And then to answer the question, man, is this thing still worth it in 2020? I will say 100% yes. This thing is still completely worth it. It's a crazy good performing iPad. It has a lot going for it. You can get them for like $300, and if you needed to replace a computer and like a MacBook if you're a college student, I think this thing can definitely do it. You know, you can have an Apple Pencil support on this thing as well, and I still think it's a very valuable device in 2020. If you want to pick up the cheapest one, I'll find the cheapest one on Amazon and link it down in the description below so you guys can get it from there and help support the channel at the same time. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel. All those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.